Hi, everyone. Welcome to DomainSherpa, and thank you for tuning into the podcast with the best domain name and digital asset content in the world. Today, we have an episode of Off the Market Forever, which is the show where we focus on the domain space through the lens of end-user acquisitions and upgrades. Today's episode is titled Somewhere.com Over the Rainbow and features special guest Nick Huber, who acquired a company, Support Shepherd, and then acquired Somewhere.com as part of a big rebrand and brand upgrade. So we talk about the acquisition of the company, the acquisition of the domain name, Nick's philosophy about domains, and why they are so important for companies looking to establish and improve their digital footprint. All that and more is coming up on today's show. And remember, if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, you can also watch the video version at DomainSherpa.com and on our YouTube channel at ds.tv. You can also listen to the shows on Apple and Spotify and other podcast platforms as well. And please make sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and all that good stuff and help Domain Sherpa grow the pie. We integrate our shows also with Muse.ai, which provides search functionality for the shows and transcripts as well. So definitely check all that out. And props to our sponsor, Dan.com, the #1 place in the world to buy and sell your domains with a special platform made for domain investors. They also get a couple of shout outs in today's episode. And special shout out to our own business, MediaOptions, the #1 domain brokerage in the world, specializing in domain acquisition, sales, and appraisals. Find out more at MediaOptions.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter for the best domain names and domain opportunities available in the market every week, and also featuring key insights and other helpful information related to branding, naming, and of course, domain investing. And remember, we've got NamesCon coming up in Austin, Texas, June 5th to June 8th. Drew will be speaking. We'll all be there live. We're actually going to have Monty and Scott from Right at the Dot on the show next week to discuss it. So if you haven't registered, please go to namescon.com and go handle that ASAP. All right, with that, it's now time to get into this episode of Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. What's up, Sherpa Network? Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Jonathan Tenenbaum, a.k.a. JT, a.k.a. Jay On, a.k.a. Sherpa Winfrey, and I'm the host and producer of Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. Today's show is an Off the Market Forever, which we haven't done in a minute, where we focus on the domain space through the lens of end-user acquisitions and upgrades, because as we say on the show, premium domains, we used to say we're like snowflakes, but snowflakes are now kind of a different thing. So we say they're like fingerprints. No two are the same. And once one is picked up by its best case end user, it is likely off the market forever. And today we've got a very special guest, Nick Huber from Somewhere.com, formerly Support Shepherd. But we're going to get into all that. First, let me introduce who I guess I'll call him for today's purposes, my co-host. Below me, we got my boy Andrew Rosner, a.k.a. Morpheus, a.k.a. the Dirk Diggler of Digital Assets, a.k.a. Bob Lee Swagger the Sniper, a.k.a. Drew. Drew got what I need, a.k.a. never going to give Drew up. What's up, dude? How are you?
I'm doing great. It's been a very eventful, let's say, 2 weeks. We've been really just crushing for the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's really been a pretty exciting, April to May so far, and excited to have Nick on and talk about another big deal that happened in the industry. So
excited. So all right, well, let's get to that.
Things.
So over to my right, we got the one and only Nick Huber, a.k.a. Slick Nick, a.k.a. the Huber Driver, a.k.a. Def Shepherd, a.k.a. Sweaty Startup, a.k.a. palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, vomit on his sweater already, mom's spaghetti, he's nervous, but on the surface, he looks calm and ready to drop bombs, but they keep on forgetting his brand name Support Shepherd isn't the same somewhere. With the exact match.com domain, it costs more than loose change, and they think he's insane, but he knows that's how he's going to change the game. You better. All right.
Not bad.
Man, when you told me I had a cheesy AKA for Nick Hoover, I was like, wow, I don't even know what to think about that. But yeah, you exceeded all expectations.
Let's go. I told you. But hey, real quick, for those of you who don't know, Nick, originally from Indiana, went to Cornell. Shout out to Andy Bernard, where he started his first company, Storage Squad. Then he and his partner, Dan Hagberg, grew that business, 25 major college towns, before selling early 2021. Actually, during that time, they also built their first storage facility from the ground up in Ithaca, New York. After selling, the company turned its attention to real estate, private equity, and self-storage operations, growing that portfolio 1.9 million square feet of self-storage across 63 locations, 11 states, a real estate portfolio worth well over $150 million. Also a big-time content creator, helping entrepreneurs, investors, operators online. Also an owner, investor, operator in a number of growing businesses as well, including somewhere.com, formerly Support Shepherd, and that's going to be a big part of our conversation today. So we're super excited to have Nick on the show with us. So Nick, first of all, how are you? Welcome to the show.
JT, Drew, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. All right. So
great having you here.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive right into it. So first of all, shout out to Elliot Silver, because he was how I first saw that you had acquired somewhere.com for Support Shepherd, which, and you'd come across my feed a lot. First of all, just kind of want to throw it out there with a ton of interesting stuff. And this is part of your, content creation piece, right? And, what I really always found interesting about the stuff that you would do online is kind of taking what are traditionally unsexy kind of businesses, and making it sexy, because, nothing's sexier than success and making money. And, and I think that for me was always kind of what I thought was interesting about coming across your stuff. So when I saw that you had this big time domain purchase, it was like, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to get somebody, who we think is, obviously successful, cool, interesting, perfect guest for us. So let's kind of,
go
ahead.
Hold on. Before we even dive in, would you consider yourself in any, it's a spectrum, but would you consider yourself a domain geek? Do you like domains? Is it something that, has appealed to you, or is this something that just sort of happened coincidentally?
Yeah, I like real estate, and I run internet companies. So this is my real estate.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm not a fan of looking and buying a domain like this. I early in my entrepreneurial career, and I think that was a level up point, because when it comes to the 1999 domains or the 999 domains, all of them are junk. So it's like putting your small business on a back road in the middle of nowhere. It isn't going to work.
Yeah. I'm glad you get that analogy. It's it's something that we've been talking about in the industry for decades. This analogy between domain names being digital commercial real estate, and I have a thesis that has been playing out quite clearly, which is that with every dollar lost in the commercial real estate industry, the brick and mortar commercial real estate industry, that value is directly accruing to the digital real estate industry. And I think we've seen that with a basically a straight line up in domain valuation, in the adoption of domain names, in let's say the acceptance and perception of domain names, and that sort of conversion to the mindset that you just laid out, which is that if we think about the principles of real estate, commercial real estate, why does a brand spend a ton of money to have some trophy piece of real estate? And it all comes down to, this is the place where I meet my customers, this is the place where I meet my employees, this is the place where I meet my vendors, this is the place where my competitors create a perception of who I am and what my image is. And all of those principles apply in digital real estate, right? It's literally where you meet your customers. It's where you meet your employees, through email and through servers. It's where you meet everybody, right? It's literally the same thing. And it comes down to the potential for foot traffic. And so the more easy to memorize, the more easy it is to say and spell, the more it resonates, the more it's already a household brand, the more foot traffic you can generate, meaning typed in traffic, or click through traffic. So anyway, sorry to interject, but I'm really happy to hear that was an analogy that you sort of arrived at on your own.
Yeah, I mean, people will spend $400,000, $800,000, $2 million, $10 million on a building to run their company all day long. A triple net lease here in a small town, Athens, Georgia, where you're getting 10,000 plus cars per day, you're going to spend $2 or $3 million for an eighth of an acre, and that's normal. But when I tweeted that I acquired somewhere.com for 400,000 or $400,000, I got a lot of people that did not understand that.
Yeah.
And I think they're missing the boat.
So, I don't want to, I don't know, JT, if you were still, talking about backstory and whatnot, but we could just
You guys
dig
just want
in.
me to, you want me to throw you my little kind of 2-minute preamble of
Yeah,
where I'm at in my career, how I stumbled
Yeah.
upon this deal, and then how we found somewhere.
Yeah.
Let's
awesome.
go.
So yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I buy, start companies. Over the last 2 years, I've started and partnered with 10 businesses, all of which own premium domains. Most of them acquired through Dan.com. Somewhere, obviously, we used a broker for. But yeah, commercial real estate. I stumbled upon a 300,000 plus following on Twitter. Realized that's a lot of opportunity to start some other things. I'm an investor. I'm an entrepreneur, and so then next came an SEO agency, and then a pay-per-click marketing agency, and then uh, a web development agency, a property and casualty insurance business, uh, several other projects here and there, my media company. So, and with all that comes, people and problems, but I'm an operator at heart. I know how to run companies. So that's what I love doing. I got involved in a company called Support Shepherd back in 2021 as an affiliate first, and then as a minority owner in 2022. The founder, Marshall Haas, and I kind of worked to grow the company with a growing team. By 2023, early, it became pretty clear to me that our domain was not going to cut it. SupportShepherd.com. Nobody knew what it meant. We hire and place Latin American and Filipino talent into American companies. We are a recruiting agency.
Mhm.
I watched too many smart people literally sitting over their shoulder, watching them misspell the word shepherd over and over and over again. SHEPPARD, SHEPARD. I sometimes got myself in a little funk on the keyboard where I couldn't spell it myself. It's 14, 15 characters, 2 words put together. A lot of reasons why I thought this domain was holding us back in business. And Marshall Haas was the majority owner. He owned 60% of the company at the time. I ended up buying the majority less than a month ago. We closed on April 30th. But I started talking to him in February of last year, being like, Marshall, look, we have to change the name. Here's another customer who's misspelled our domain. And I just sat and watched somebody misspell. My business partner, who's an Ivy League grad, I sat and watched him typing on a computer, and he could not type the correct word into the domain. I'm like, this is killing us. It's killing us.
Yeah.
And we started looking at $10,000 domains. 2 words did not make sense together, just random words that we thought we could put together and were easier to spell. I started urging him to invest more. And I started looking at some pretty hefty domains. I just pulled up an email from a broker last October. I was looking at track.com asking $1.1 million. I was looking at jake.com asking $600,000. A 1 word that's easy to memorize. We could build a brand around anything. We soon found there was some pushback. Marshall was starting to come around to the fact that, hey, this is a big boy business now, doing millions of dollars a month of revenue, 150 plus employees. He started to come around, started to say, okay, yeah, this is something we need to do. But we were kind of stuck in the $100,000 domain range, which you can get there's some good options. There's some single words that aren't necessarily English words, but they're easy to remember. There's misspellings of a lot of words. There's 2 words that are shorter, easier to remember, put together. And we finally found somewhere.com. They were asking about $500,000. We made them an offer for $400,000 in November, where we pay $25,000 a month for 16 months. And we pulled the trigger and acquired it in November of last year. So technically it was Marshall Haas's decision to pull the trigger and buy somewhere.com, but it was kind of a team effort of, hey, this is what we need to do for this company. Around that same time, he actually decided that he wanted to sell the business, got an unsolicited offer from a pretty big PE group, and brought it to me and said, Nick, I think I want to sell part of this company. It's a life-changing amount of money for me. I was a minority partner. It was not a life-changing amount of money for me. And I basically, over the next couple of months, convinced them to sell the business to me instead. And I took ownership and finished off the rebrand during that time.
Nice. So I want to dig into, how you thought about I guess, as you said, it was a team effort, but how did you guys think about, the price versus the value? When you see somewhere.com, what was, what triggered you to say, okay, it's $400,000. It's 4 times the budget we thought sort of had, arbitrarily set for ourselves. But what were the triggers that caused you to think, okay, this is going to have an ROI for us? I mean, you mentioned typos, that's a major one, but we're the number one domain broker in the world. I've transacted more domain names, I think, than anybody that ever lived. And I continuously, even with the smartest operators, the smartest entrepreneurs, people that are household names that are ubiquitously considered, extremely intelligent people in technology. And they sometimes don't get, well, why should I spend all this money on the domain name? If people can't spell my domain, they'll find me in Google, right? That's the most common pushback is, oh, but they'll find me in Google, right? And I imagine you came to the same conclusions that we have, which is that, even if that may be true, you're introducing friction, right? And as we know, friction, every single step of friction that gets introduced into a transaction or into a communication dilutes it and decreases your ultimate conversion rate. So what were the triggers that caused you to sort of arrive at the decision?
Yeah, I acquired the business at a $50 million valuation. I raised $20 million from investors. I took some debt from the sellers to the tune of $9.3 million of debt, personal debt. And it's just a no-brainer to me to not lose the forest for the trees here. We have a lot of competitors flowing into the international recruiting market. We have competitors with .xyz domain names. We have competitors with words that don't make sense. We have misspellings. We have all these other competitors that are spending serious marketing money. So one of them just raised at a $50+ million valuation, or I think they actually raised $50 million in a round to try to compete with us and come after us. And one way to, fend off competition is to build an amazing brand that's memorable.
100%.
And obviously there's the operations piece, which I'm working on as well with my team of, how do we become the best recruiters in the country at what we do? Extreme speed, extreme professionalism, just very good at what we do. But then there's just the piece that you can't ignore, which is the value of a good brand. So, when you're raising $20 million, borrowing another $9 million, and you're buying controlling interest in a $50 million company, it's a no-brainer to put that $50 million company inside of a building that is attractive and easy to remember. It's the best money I've ever spent, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. What's interesting is that you mentioned you did sort of I don't know if it's a lease to own, lease with an option. I'm not sure how it's structured, but talk to me a little bit about, like how you thought about that from a cash flow perspective, because that's something I've promoted for years. And I'm finally, over the last, I would say last 2 years, finally they're starting to be more appetite for these lease option deals. But to me, it's a no-brainer. It's like, I don't care if you're Amazon, like it doesn't really matter how much money you have, or, it makes a lot of sense to let the domain pay for itself. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that was proposed by the broker or by the seller, or was
that was kind of that was Marshall's idea to do that? I'm of the camp where, hey, this is more cash flow than the business. We make more cash flow than this in 1 month. This is something that I would prefer to just go ahead and write a check for. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If there's an ability or a desire to smooth out earnings to pay for it over time, I think it makes perfect sense. And if you can come to an agreement like that, I mean, I'm definitely happy with Marshall's negotiation to do the lease down for sure.
And did you?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead. I was just going to say.
No, I was just going to say. Generally speaking, these lease deals end up costing less than, let's say, one of your, marketing employees, right? And it's like, this is your company, right? Even if you have a physical business, the way that people are interacting with it, finding you, making decisions about you, is online, and this is your presence. And so I always find it, perplexing when I approach a company. I'm like, look, guys, this is your exact brandmatch.com domain name. and you can get it for less than you're paying your vice president of marketing, right? Which one do you think is going to have a higher ROI over the next decade, right?
Yeah, it's it's buying a premium domain name. I just can't emphasize it enough. I mean, we're in a very competitive space. We had a mature company where, when you're buying a $50 million business, that's a level up and you need to buy a better domain. But I name every single one of my companies based on what domain's available. Period.
Yeah.
I don't think of the name and then try to buy. My buddy started a peer group called Hampton. Well, there's Hampton Hotels. So he couldn't buy Hampton.com. So his domain, he's already built a $25 million plus company, and he's using a web domain called joinhampton.com.
I know.
Joinhampton.com is the name of his domain. It's silly. So every business in my portfolio, webrun.com, we acquired that domain for $8,000. AdRhino.com, performance marketing agency. We acquired that one for about $3,000. And these are all rough estimates. I wasn't able to find all the receipts, but this is all within $1,000. ReviewBoss.com, building a project around that, spent $10,000. TitanRisk.com, a property and casualty insurance business, $3,500. Obviously, Somewhere.com. BoltStorage.com, self-storage business. I think we paid $1,500 for that domain. SweatyStartup.com. NickHuber.com, that's my name. I paid $600 for NickHuber.com. I mean, I start on Dan.com when I'm going to start a company, period.
Hey, and they are a sponsor of our show. So, big shout out to Dan.com. So this is great for them too. Yeah. And I think, it can't be lost on the idea that, you kind of mentioned it with the whole Hampton piece, is that, your brand is somewhere, right? And you are going to compete with every other company that's trying to, brand around the one word somewhere. And if you don't have the .com, then you will never actually win that battle. You will always have to.
Well, you simply don't own the namespace, right? If you have something, it's all well and good.
Can we talk about .nets and .ios and .xyzs and?
Yeah, sure.
It's the dumbest thing that I've ever seen is when people build real companies, trying to build real enterprise value with real employees, raising millions of dollars, and they're building it behind a .io, a .net, a .xyz brand name. I want to smack I want to smack an entrepreneur daily when I look at where they're investing to build their company. I mean, think about how this domain was $400,000, but think about how expensive the domain was over the previous 2 years. Over the previous 2 years, and lost revenue, and the amount of people who couldn't remember us, and the amount of people who just looked at supportshepherd.com and were like, these people are not legit. This is not a reputable business if their name is supportshepherd.com. That was a very expensive mistake not doing something like this at the very beginning. So when we started WebRun, when we started AdRhino, when we started Bold SEO, we didn't make that mistake.
Yeah.
So it's really quite simple. I used to be where you're at, which is it almost made me aggressive when I would see these things. And what I came to realize is that, sometimes people need training wheels, right? And so the problem arises when people don't realize that they're riding a bike with training wheels and they think that they're on a big boy bike, right? And so I think it's perfectly fine that where I've arrived at is like, okay, you're going to launch a new company. I think it's perfectly fine to go get a $10 domain, $1,000 domain, to get something that will suffice.
Get them for a couple $100, right? Yeah. I'm not saying to spring before you can afford it. I'm with you.
100%. Test it out. See if you've actually got a business. See if there's a business there, right? Can you prove that you've got a business? The moment you realize that I've got a business, and the moment that you are clear about where you're trying to go, what your vision is, what's the end game here, you are negligent. You're truly negligent to any of your investors, to your employees, and to yourself by not upgrading your domain. Because you simply, if you're, I don't want to, go too hard on Hampton, but so let's talk about just make something up.
Yeah, look, there's an HVAC company. Pegasus, there's an HVAC company in my town that is a $50 million business. They net 8 or 10 million of EBITDA a year. Yeah. And their domain has 26 characters. Their web domain has 26 characters. It's 3 words put together, including services at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Odyssey putters. Odyssey putters. I watched PGA. I watched the PGA Championship this week. I watched Hovland go down the stretch trying to make putts. I watched the guy who won make putts. Zoomed in on the putter while he's putting for the win was the name Odyssey behind a putter. That is a damn near $1 billion company, one of the biggest names in golf. Odyssey.com is for sale right now for $3.8 million, and these jokers are not spending that money to buy it.
They lost more than $3.8 million on that single zoom in on the putter, and people went to Odyssey.com and they're like, they gave up, right? What do we know from Amazon, right? We learned that the moment they introduced the one-click shopping, I don't remember what the number was, but their conversion rate went up exponentially. And what that tells you is all of those people that abandoned their shopping cart prior to that, right? It's not that those people suddenly appeared, suddenly there was more demand, maybe, but that's at the margin. The vast majority of that new conversion was happening because people weren't abandoning their shopping cart because of introduced friction, unnecessary friction. And so when you zoom in and people had that moment of inspiration, they go, I'm going to go to Odyssey.com. I'm going to get one of these putters because this guy's using it. And then they hit a dead end and it's a domain for sale. And they're like, I'm not going to go search and find this. That spur of the moment decision is fleeting and it's gone. And I guarantee you it cost them probably more than the 3.8 million it would have cost to buy the domain name.
I don't know about that one. I don't know if that one zoom in was a $3.8 million mistake, but over the years, you're 100%.
It's one of the most watched sports events in the world, right?
Yeah, compound.
There wasn't an ROI.
Without getting into the nuance about how much money they lost in that one instance. I mean, it speaks to without question the fact that they're missing sales, and it is almost like the idea of like kind of the survivorship bias piece you referencing, Drew, where you're saying it's almost like once Amazon made the switch, it's not even just the evidence of, hey, that's how many sales, but it's like, how many did they actually lose that they can't even track? And I'm sure they obviously know like cart abandonment and all that kind of stuff. But without a doubt. And the other piece too is when you have a company who has a brand that is based on like a one-word name and they don't have the .com domain, you also have the security risk. I mean, the amount of emails, the amount of stuff that just goes to the wrong place. Like, for a company, we see it with a company like clear.com. We own clear.com. And for a company like Clear, the airport folks, right, who people believe is clear.com, we get emails and calls every single day about people wanting to change their account, wanting to access their account, wanting to give us their account information. And it's like you realize the actual security risk, the hole that you have by not owning the .com domain and the confusion that's created out there in the market and the disservice that you're doing, like to Drew's point, to your investors, to yourself, to your employees, to your customers themselves. And, it's...
Confusion is lost money, right? Period. Full stop. Like it really is just that simple. If you're creating confusion with your brand, you're losing money. Okay. Yep. You can quantify it however you want. You can measure it and it's going to be different. And the types of measurements you're using to quantify that are going to be different across industries. But if you're creating confusion in the marketplace with your brand, you are losing money. Period. End of story. And, if you don't own your exactbrandmatch.com, then you don't own your brand. Your brand is encumbered. And if it's Join Hampton, then your brand is Join Hampton. Your brand is not Hampton, right? Because if you say my brand is Hampton, then the perception is going to be that you're on Hampton.com. That's where the email is going to go. That's where the search is going to go. And so
that's where the traffic's going to go.
Yeah.
And, yeah, without a doubt. So real quick, Nick, can you tell us, did somebody, you said you used a broker. Can you tell us who that was?
I'm waiting on that. I can't find it in my email. So I asked Marshall. So hopefully he texts me back by the time this,
all good.
Ends.
I'm sure
it was one of the biggest brokers that, has a list of all these, or maybe one of the subsidiaries that also kind of feeds off of the top, 300 available domains that are out there.
That's interesting. Yeah. So we'll see if we get that info and then we can talk about it. Otherwise, we can append it later or something, but on social or something. But
he deserves a shout out for sure. He did a great job. So I prefer to give it to him.
No, I love it. And so now what's next? So you've acquired the company, acquired the domain. And so are you guys pumping now more marketing dollars into what you're doing with Somewhere and why the name Somewhere as specifically? Like what's the
it sounds like it was just opportunistic, right?
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
going to ask you.
We looked at snowglobe.com and detour.com and microgrid.com and crawl.com and left.com and jake.com and hooray.com and track.com and somewhere.com.
Okay.
Right. And it was one that we saw. We're like, damn, we can build a brand around that. It's under $500,000. Let's jump on it.
Yeah.
There was not as much thought as people think of like, oh, we got to have everything perfect. It was more like, hey, here's our options. Let's invest. Like it makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Well, and I think, and to me, it's the idea of like remote employees, right? They are somewhere. We're all, there's something to that can easily tie it together and make it make sense. And I think
that was an added bonus that we could build a tagline that is, talent is everywhere, hire with somewhere. That's our, and it's a flat world now. I mean, there's internet, there's fast internet, more and more and more places. Even 5-6 years ago, people couldn't work from home in countries of Latin America and the Philippines with fast, reliable internet and electricity. And, now they can. So
Starlink just launched internet access to all of the Fiji Islands yesterday.
Yep.
Love
Just
it.
beginning.
Yeah. It is. It's a whole new world.
MediaOptions is the industry's leading domain broker specializing in domain acquisitions, high-value domain sales, and domain name consultation. As pioneers and thought leaders on the subject of the domain aftermarket and domain name value, plus through their clear domain acquisition service, MediaOptions offers startups and established corporations an unparalleled scope of high-value domain options, providing access to domain names and curation technologies not available elsewhere. MediaOptions believes in the power of a great domain name and is dedicated to helping you obtain yours. Call or email today to put a domain to work for you.
All right. And so the reaction to people in your space who aren't necessarily, you've got a lot of followers, you've got a big audience. They're not necessarily domain enthusiasts or even appreciate the value of domains, right? So was the feedback like, wow, that's crazy. I mean, what was that like?
I think it was split, right? The people who have built companies before, they all thought it was a brilliant move. Like, look, you guys needed to do it. Shepherd was a terrible name. Somewhere's great. Like, it's one word. I can remember it. Good job. Congratulations. That's a great investment. That's going to pay for itself in the first 2 years. Other people who have never built a company and have a 18, 20 character domain name themselves and got a little defensive, started talking a little crap on the internet. That's how it went.
Yeah.
And look,
it's so funny.
It's shock, right? It's shocking to see $400,000 on a web domain when this house I'm living in right now, I spent $289,000 on.
Yeah.
So the house I live in right now with my family was cheaper than the domain that I bought to run one of my assets, right?
Yeah. But these are tools, right? And so how much can you leverage a tool, right? If you have a tool, if you have a hammer, right, that's one thing. And that hammer costs a few bucks, right? Because one man can use the hammer. He can hammer so many nails a day. And then you get a nail gun. And it's like, nail gun's going to cost a few $100s more because now that same guy can put 100x more nails in per day than he can with the single hammer, right? And your house is, I'm sure it's wonderful, but it's just a house for you, maybe your family, right? But it doesn't scale, right? A domain name can be a house. It can be used as simply as an email address for you, but it can also house somewhere.com can be the email address for thousands of employees. Somewhere.com can be the destination for tens of thousands or millions of visitors. It is a infinitely or virtually infinitely scalable tool. And therefore, the value is proportional to the scalability.
What's your guys' estimate here? I mean, when you look at this investment, $400,000. I don't know anything about domains. I'm here with two experts. You can't let me out of here without ask you a question. What's your read on the situation? Was it a good investment? Do you think it has the potential to take? We wanted something that could take this business if we're good enough operators, right? And the market allows, and it takes a lot of luck as well. But we wanted something that it had the potential to propel this business to, $1 billion valuation, like big time revenue, maybe a potentially public offering that can take us to the level of some of these giant companies and give us that, that brandable asset, that reputation that's needed to do that.
Yep.
Okay.
And
so you came to the right place. Domain valuation is somewhat of my obsession. And so I've got an algorithm that I've created for sort of assessing what is the objective value. Now, I want to preface this with domain names almost never sell for their objective value. They sell for the subjective value. So most importantly is actually who owns it, right? So assuming that you've got a buyer that is, legitimate and is sincerely interested to acquire a domain name, then the most important factor is who owns it, right? And so that's very subjective. Is it somebody that with, weak hands and they just need capital? Is it someone with strong hands? They know what they've got. They know what it's worth. And then comes the need of the buyer. In your case, this was an opportunistic purchase, right? It worked, but you could have very easily moved to another domain. You could have been, deer.com, turtle.com. You could have been tree. It was relatively arbitrary. It checked the boxes that you needed. It was in a budget that you, sort of had assessed for yourself. And so the subjective nature was less applicable to you. It was just opportunistic. So it really came down to who owns it and what do they think it's worth and how much conviction do they have in that value, right? So if I walk through, again, this is in a vacuum. This isn't taking into account any existing SEO value, backlink profile, domain authority, any of that stuff, okay? We're assessing the domain name objectively in a vacuum, and the variables that go into that assessment are going to be how much search volume is there for the keyword somewhere? How much broad search volume is there for the keyword somewhere in connection with other words? Somewhere over the rainbow, for example, right? What are advertisers paying per click to get traffic for the keyword somewhere, if any, right? How many characters is the domain? How old is the domain? These are all, there's roughly 32 variables that go into it. But for the most part, let's say the 80-20 rule, the 80% of the value is, again, the objective value is going to be in what's the search volume look like? What's the broad search volume look like? What's the cost per click? And what is the trend, right? Is search volume, is the use in commerce and use in culture increasing or is it decreasing? In the case of somewhere, it's pretty much steady as she goes, okay? Over the last decade, the amount of search volume has fluctuated, but it's more or less, from start to finish, we're basically in a flat plane, right? Which is relatively positive, right? It's not some mega trend like, I don't know, we just sold nano.com, right? Like nano has this mega trend because of material sciences are increasingly using nanoparticles. There's more and more cultural use of the word nano for various reasons, right? Particularly because of the vaccine and because of other medical things that have sort of come into the mainstream dialogue. Okay, so you have roughly 35,000 exact match searches per month for the keyword somewhere, okay? We can't get the current Google estimate for the CPC, so I'm going to assume $1. Okay, that's sort of the neutral CPC. What would you? I mean, you're the perfect guy to ask this. So the one variable that is a little bit more subjective, but it's subjective to an industry rather than to individual people, is what's a reasonable business multiple? So maybe you can even use the multiple you paid for the business. So if you can share that, but like what I'm trying to extrapolate here is this is how many people search per month for this term. This is the cost per click that I would pay to Google to get that traffic in organically. Okay. And then I'm going to extrapolate that out over, however many months makes sense for this particular industry. So generally speaking, I usually use 36 to be conservative. But what would you say is a reasonable business multiple for this industry?
Publicly, even at scale, publicly traded recruiting companies are 5 to 7 times earnings. So not super expensive. We're not talking SaaS tech multiples here.
Yeah. So top line, you're talking about like a 2 to 3 multiple.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. So
I paid much more than that because of the growth trends and my comfort level, but I'm just saying like a non, opportunistic buyer.
Totally. I and that's right in line with most businesses that we see, right? Unless it's some SaaS company that's got wild, 30% month over month growth or something, it's generally 36 months is generally a pretty well accepted multiple. So, we extrapolate that out. I'm skipping the CPC because it's $1, so it's basically neutral. Let's say 35,000 times.
But I don't think that 35,000 searchers are all looking for recruiting in the Philippines is the problem. I think they accidentally typed somewhere into the Google.
No. But again, if we were talking about recruiting.com, that would be relevant, right? But we're not. We're talking about a brand. And so we're trying to objectively value the brand itself in a vacuum. Because at the moment of, I don't know the circumstances, but it doesn't really matter. But at the moment of, let's say that transaction, the seller doesn't know what somewhere.com is going to be used for. It's generic enough in nature that it could be a fashion brand. It could be anything, right? It could be an app. It could be virtually anything. So the utility of it is not really applicable. So that we extrapolate that out to 36 months, you come to 1.26 million. And then you're going to divide that by what we would say is, an applicable click-through rate. I generally use about 25%. So if we take 25%, which is, if you are that top organic listing in Google on page 1, not paid, but organic, you're going to get somewhere between 18 and 28%. I like to use 25 for easy math, especially if I'm doing public math. So, so if we do that, and again, this is the simplified version, right? We're not taking into account the length, the age, and there's a whole bunch of other soft variables. But again, this is going to get you to that 80% rule. We arrived at $504,000, right? So the owner was asking $500,000, which we would assess as the full retail value of that name as $500,000. You paid $400,000. You got a 20% discount on that. So what I would say is you're in the strike zone, right? You didn't overpay. You got a reasonable discount. You're right in the strike zone.
So my partner Marshall just texted me back. He said, I originally found it for sale on Brand Bucket, but then he found the direct owner who is a higher up at namecheap.com. And then he did a private sale through escrow.com.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was probably a Richard name.
Oh,
yeah, Teddy or Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, Teddy or Richard.
Yeah, all good. And I love hearing the way that, and obviously utilizing escrow, that's an important partner of ours. And, shout out to Brand Bucket as well. And, all part of the ecosystem, which is super cool. And Drew's long technical, sort of explanation because of the Rosner equation, and he loves to get way under the hood and all that. And
no, that was super helpful. I appreciate it.
On our
shows,
I
think it's useful. I take offense to you putting me down for giving the technical explanation.
I'm not, man. This is part of this is what makes you the best in the biz, man. You're the best, Drew. Don't worry about it, man. It's all good. I got you, dog. But I think the point I wanted to make really quick was, you run through the technical analysis and, it's very clear based off of that, this domain was priced pretty much where it needed to be. You got a good deal on it. And then I think you've also, this was what I was getting at. And I was just being funny with you, Drew. So, it's all love. But, I think the subjective piece is also where it then starts to add even additional value, in my opinion. So on our shows, when we do the DomainSherpa review and we bring on some of the OGs from the domain space, we do a game called the Domain Game where the Sherpas will talk about, hey, I just recently sold this. I recently bought this. What does everybody think? And we do kind of a real quick back and napkin just based off of gut reaction and feel. And I think from a gut feeling, I would say that as a buyer, an end user with a real intent to use this across a wide scope of with an intent to try to grow this into $1 billion publicly traded company, I think you guys hit a home run. I mean, I think it's a fantastic name. You got a good deal on it. It's a great brand. You now own the brand. You're a great company behind it. And it all ties together in a way that I think that adds even more value that you guys achieved beyond what you paid for it. You know what I mean? So,
and if it all burns down and we need to sell it, we can kind of look at the intrinsic value
again. I mean, it depends on time frame, of course, right? And other circumstances. Assuming, look, you're a super savvy marketer, right? You are going to increase the value of this domain name over time, most likely, most probabilistically, through SEO, through content, through visibility, right? And so more than likely you are going to have a domain name that's worth more than you paid if and when you ever need in the future to sell it. I think I could tell you after the show, but I sold a domain that we owned, extremely similar, very similar, for almost exactly the same price. So I think you nailed it. I think you're right in that strike zone. Yeah. But I think walking through an exercise like that of how to think objectively about the value of a domain name, I think it's quite important for other entrepreneurs, because I think that most people just feel lost and they're sort of check the wind and take an arbitrary, estimate of what they would pay or what their budget should be or what the domain is worth. And, I think what this does is it also helps you think about how to get an ROI on the domain, right? Well, the whole premise is based upon conversion, click-through rate first and then conversion rates, right? And so by having a domain like this, you're going to get a higher click-through rate because of trust. By having a domain like this, you're going to have a higher conversion rate because of trust, right? So first click-throughs and then conversions, roughly doubling both, maybe a little bit, rough 30-40% increase on click-through rates, roughly a doubling of conversion rates once they're on your site. And it all comes down to trust. And, that ultimately these domain names are trust signals. And so knowing how to assess what your ROI on gaining that trust signal can be, I think is very powerful. It's a very powerful tool for, basically enabling entrepreneurs to make these decisions, without feeling that they've, succumbed to ridicule from random people on Twitter. Or X.
I'm used to that though.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. But a couple of things, and we're running up on time a little bit, so we've got about 5 minutes left. And but I think that when you talk about wanting to take that next step as a business, right, and get to where you're publicly traded, billion-dollar valuation, all that kind of stuff, having the brand locked down is such a critical piece. And Drew spoke to this even when Drew was on Tim Ferriss's show, talked about when Facebook needed to go get FB.com, I think, and and we helped Zoom acquire Zoom.com because they needed that as part of their process. And and even Jason Calacanis has spoken, and we reference this a lot, where he said he invested in Calm.com because of the strength of the domain name. So all of that really ties together. And kind of referencing Drew's interview with Tim, if for those of you who haven't seen that, I mean, there's a whole section at the end of that, sort of almost like where they get into the real nuts and bolts of domain valuation, in a really meaningful way, which is really cool. So, and this all just ties together, man. And I think the other piece too, that not to keep mentioning the podcast that Drew did with Tim, but he also mentioned how repeat entrepreneurs understand the value of domains. And that was the thing that you had said earlier that I thought was an absolute bullseye, which was, you said, look, the people who reacted, people who've, started companies before, started successful businesses, they get it. They were like, that's a great move. Way to level up, way to do what you need to do to be able to set yourself up to be able to be successful like that. And
it's funny. I had written down one question on my notebook here, and that one question was literally on that topic. It was, I am confident at some point in your career, through one of the businesses, the many businesses that you had or have, you must have had a bad experience with a domain name. What was that bad experience that made you understand why in the future you're never going to start a business that doesn't have a good domain name? And it's precisely what you said. We see it all the time. The guys that had, whether successful or unsuccessful, it basically is irrelevant whether they had a successful first venture or unsuccessful first venture. The ones that that venture was on a bad domain name, and then they come back for round two to launch a new venture, almost universally, they understand, because of the friction of telling people their domain name for their email address, and the people don't get it and ask 5 times on every meeting. Well, how do you spell your email again? It's situations like that, lost emails, typos, all of these different friction
memorability,
points,
being able to recall it when you're telling a friend, the word of mouth effect. Yep.
And also just the difference in the subtle non-tangibles of like the pride of your employees. Your employees are going to be proud to have, Molly at somewhere.com. They were not proud to have Molly at supportshepherd.com. It doesn't mean that they had a negative feeling about it, but they didn't have a positive one. And there is a true sense of pride. I've seen this across so many different companies where we get feedback later on from a principal. They're like, suddenly my employees are so excited that we've got a cool domain name as their email address now. Like, that sense of pride increases employee retention, right?
Yep.
There's another ROI on your domain investment, right? And so it's these repeat founders that have these negative experiences their first go around generally. And then they come back and they're like, I'm not doing that again. Or they had a positive experience and they came to understand through positive feedback why that domain name was so important to that first venture.
Yep. Very well said.
Yeah, man. All good stuff. Well, look.
Good place to wrap it.
Yeah, no, look, I think we covered a lot of ground. Nick, man, we really, really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have anything? So we'll include links to some of the stuff in the show notes. So people will be able to find you. They'll be able to find, obviously somewhere, but somewhere is easy to find that now, so
yeah.
But anything else, even, Bolt stores, whatever links you want, we'll put in there.
Yeah, I'll just throw in my portfolio of domains so folks can kind of see where I've invested. Put my money where the mouth is.
Absolutely perfect.
I think overall, look, I'm an uneducated opinion, but I think domains are still quite underpriced, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah. We haven't even introduced leverage, right? I mean, imagine what the value of commercial real estate would be if there was no leverage in that market.
Yeah,
right?
No banks. Yep.
So, but step one, this is. I don't want to drag this out, but we launched a project with Rally Road. I don't know if you know who they are. It's a fractionalized collectibles marketplace. So they got full SEC approval to basically offer collectibles where you can invest into, let's say, a classic car, or Michael Jordan sneakers that were game worn, or a jersey, or what have you. And we introduced domain names there. And the part of the idea there is to be able to get a mark-to-market value for domain names, because in order to introduce credit, in order to introduce insurance, in order to introduce these financial products that exist in the commercial real estate world, first we need banks and insurance companies to get comfortable with, well, what is this thing worth? And so, first
I have an uneducated opinion on that too. I think it's really hard to loan money on things that don't create income. And a domain name by itself does not create income, unfortunately. I mean, maybe a little bit by having a landing page on, but real estate developers make a lot of money because they go and buy a piece of land, which is virtually unleverable. You can't get a bank loan for a piece of land very easily because the bank will say, hey, what money's coming in to pay this note? Yeah. They go buy this piece of land and they build a building on top of it, which then creates money and then is leverageable. And there's a big spread there, right? There's a big spread in business.
We lost you for a second. Nick?
Right. Anyway. Lost me.
Sorry. Yeah, we lost you for a second.
It's all good. Basically, business owners are real estate developers for domains, because they can put something valuable on top of it that's making money.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's 100%. Exactly right. What a domain is a raw piece of land waiting for the developer with a big enough idea, right? And if you've got an empty lot across from Central Park on Fifth Avenue in New York, and somebody comes along and is like, look, I want to set up a lemonade stand on this lot. Wow, what a great foot traffic I'm going to get. I'm going to tell you, like, look, I appreciate your interest, but I think this piece of land deserves more than a lemonade stand, right? And so, each domain name needs its highest and best use case buyer in order to achieve its full value.
Amen.
And I think you are the highest and best use case for somewhere.com. This is, a great fit. So congratulations. Congratulations on the acquisition.
I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the support. Thanks for the knowledge.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much. And to Drew, thank you for taking the time. And to the audience, I say in every show, thank you guys for tuning in. Without you, there is no us. So please, check out the show notes, get familiar with Nick and what they're up to. And obviously, if you have any staffing needs, get to somewhere.com. They're doing some amazing things. So all good stuff. Super great to have you on the show today, Nick. Thank you again, Drew. Thank you again to everybody else tuning in. And we'll see you next time here on Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains.